What's up guys, my name is Andy. In this video, I'm going to be installing a power steering kit on my 66 Mustang that was put together by Maier. Now this kit includes a KRC pump and then a Borgeson style power steering box. So we don't need something like that steering ram that goes underneath the car like on the drag link part. You won't need that because it's all done in the steering box and with this pump. So it's a smaller kit that takes up less space and it'll look a lot better in the engine bay that I've got going on here. Let's head over to the bench and take a look at the parts that come in the kit. So in the kit, you're gonna get this super compact power steering pump, and this is gonna mount on the front of the driver's side head. You got the pulley that's gonna go here on the shaft of the pump, the spacer, and then here you've got your bracket that you're gonna be mounting the pump to, and then it's got this adjustment so that you can tension the belt, for the pulley. And then these are some spacers and stuff, and we'll talk about that when we get into it. What's cool is they include this little tag that's on the pump when you get it, and it's just some stats on how they tested the pump, so I like that. And then in addition to the KRC kit, you're gonna get your two lines. Now this one with these ends on here, this is gonna be the high pressure side. This is gonna be going from the pump to the steering box, and then you've got your low pressure side or your return side. And that's identified by the way the couplings are on here, so just pay attention to that part. And then there's a pitman arm here that's included. This is for the 64 to 67. I believe later in 67, on the pitman arm, the ball joint's on here instead of on the drag link. But again, we'll talk about that here in a minute. This, because I have a 66, I'm gonna need to use this. And the other part, it's the steering box itself. It included these 3 bolts. These are the mounting bolts that go on there. I don't know if this comes in every kit. I know that the bolts on my car are actually not the right ones. I've got a bunch of washers stacked in there to space out because the bolt's too long. I am looking forward to getting the right bolt lengths in there. But we'll go over how this is gonna install in the car when we get to it. And then the last thing in the kit is the instructions. So these 2 pieces of paper here are from KRC themselves, and then Maier includes this printed instructions for the installation. The pictures, because it's in black and white, some of these pictures are a little hard to see what's going on in here. Mike does include a PDF copy on the website. If you just go check this out on his website, you'll see a PDF copy. You can open it up, and of course the pictures are all color, and it's a lot easier to see what's going on, so that's good to know. The only other thing that's not included in my kit is the steering shaft. Now I talked to them when I ordered this, told them that I have a tilt steering shaft in my car, so I don't need this unit included in here. It would come in the kit normally, but I don't need it because of what I have in my car. But we'll go over that when we get to the install part, because that actually changes the installation. Again, we'll go over that when we get there, but that's the last thing that would be included in this kit that I don't have. Now, what's not included in the kit that you need to pick up for yourself, you're gonna need at least a double rib pulley, because on my car, I have the single rib pulley for the water pump and the single rib pulley for the crankshaft hub, because I'm only running the alternator. Because I'm adding this power steering, I need at least a double rib. If you had air conditioning, you probably already have a double rib or a 3 rib for your setup. So I needed to buy these. These are not included. And the reason why they don't know what kind of setup you have on your car, so it makes a difference. So you need to source those parts, and then a belt for this. But I'm gonna wait until I get this installed on the car so that I can measure, with the diameter of the pulley here and the pulley here on the water pump, so I can find out what belt I need to get, and I'll order that here in town and get it picked up, and we'll get that installed a little bit later in the video. And then of course, just some power steering fluid, and again, we'll get that at the end of the video. Now before I start taking the car apart, I wanna cover the differences between the kit that I have here and the one that you get from Maier, and also that's gonna change a little bit of the install. In fact, really, what's hard to me about this video is this is gonna almost be less of a how-to on how to install this kit and more of just what I did for my car, because my car is not like most of the Mustangs out there. Again, I have that tilt steering column, and that changes the dynamics of what we're gonna do for the install here. I don't have to take out the old one. I've already got a spline shaft on the end of my tilt steering column that's gonna mate up with the universal joint here for the steering box. So that's gonna change some stuff. If you have the stock steering column in the 64 to 66, you're actually gonna have to either remove the header to pull that out because I have that long steering shaft, or you're gonna have to cut the steering shaft off. You have to modify the steering column. You've got to unwire stuff. Don't let that overwhelm you. I covered a lot of that when I put that tilt steering column in the car several years ago. It's a lot of work, but it's something you can be done, and it's all laid out in the instructions that Maier has. So you can do it. I don't have to do a lot of that stuff because I've already done a lot of that work on a previous upgrade. Another thing that's covered in the instructions is whether you have like the Z-bar for the clutch actuation, or if you've got an automatic, then that doesn't matter. He covers it in the instructions on what you need to do. I don't have to worry about that because I have a hydraulic clutch, so that eliminates some of the steps that I need to worry about. And then another nice thing about this setup is this steering box, this Borgeson style steering box, is gonna clear most headers, but there may be some headers out there that it doesn't clear, so you're gonna wanna check that out. If I were you, I would just give Maier a call and explain to him what you have, and he'll tell you what will fit and what won't work and that kind of stuff. So they're a great resource. I like calling them because I can bounce stuff off of them and get the information that I need. So if you guys need to do that, give him a call, he'll talk to you. And the last thing that I wanted to point out with my tilt steering column that I have, I actually ordered the wrong one for this car back when I put that in. It's actually shorter than what you want it to be. The one that I have doesn't stick out of the firewall like it's supposed to. The one I should have ordered, I think sticks out like an extra inch or two out of the firewall. And that may play a role in how everything mounts up. Because the steering box that you get, the Borgeson box, because this section right here from the center part of the steering shaft that goes down to the pitman arm, from here over, this is longer than the stock box, and that changes the fitment of everything inside over here. And if you had the tilt steering column that I should have ordered, that may interfere with where it meets up with the end of the shaft here on the steering box. Because the one I have is shorter, it actually gives me more room for the universal joint. So when I get to that point, I'm gonna have to find out what universal joint I can use. Normally you wouldn't have that problem because if most of you guys just have the stock steering column, and the way this will come out, you'll have to modify yours and it'll fit with all this and you get it to the right length. It's all, again, all in the instructions. But for my specific setup, we're gonna have to get this installed and see what the length is for that coupler that I'm gonna need to go from my steering shaft to here. This is something that, again, most of you guys aren't gonna have to deal with because of that one that I ordered was too short, and that was my fault, and I covered that in that video, but just wanna give you guys a heads up on that part. So from here I can start taking the car apart, so let's jump right in. First thing I want to do before I get the car jacked up and put up on some jack stands is to go after this coupler that I have there. I need to take off those 2 or 3 nuts and back out those Allen screws so that when I pull out the steering box, it'll slide right off the steering shaft and make it easier from down below. Next, we're going to want to go after the pitman arm and get it disconnected from the drag link here on the steering linkage. We'll take this cotter pin out and then get this castle nut off of there. Now, this is fairly new setup, so it should come apart pretty easily. But for those of you that have never removed this might be a little bit of work. They say try not to use a pickle fork because you can damage the boot inside here. Use your best, you know, if you can not do that, that'd be great. The best way to do it is to just go ahead and use something like a dead blow hammer and smack on the pitman on here, and it should break the ball joint free and pull that out and you can separate it. All right, despite what I was just saying, I had to use a pickle fork. I just could not get that guy apart. I don't think the boot is damaged. It's a little chewed up a little bit, but I think we're gonna be okay. We're gonna be able to salvage that. So now I'm gonna take these 3 bolts that are holding the rest of this steering box in. Remember I was talking about how I have all this stack of washers on here. So I get those guys out and then we can pull the steering box out. All right guys, I didn't film all that. That was a lot of wrestling of parts and stuff, and it's gonna be different for your car than it is for mine, partly because your header's gonna be different. I've got this master cylinder brace that I had to disconnect. I had to disconnect the master cylinder so I can move it around. They even tell you to take the pitman arm off the bottom of the steering box so you can pull it out through here a little easier, and I didn't do that. And I left it on there, struggled with it. I was able to get it out, but they talk about in the instructions that taking the pitman arm off, and then you may need to remove your headers or may need to remove the master cylinder, but you are able to get it out if you have cut your steering shaft, because mine was already cut. I didn't have to fight any of that kind of stuff, so it did make it easier. That's why this is gonna be a little bit different for your car than it is for mine, but I was able to get it out of there. They also say this is a good time to take advantage and kind of clean this area here and then clean the side of the frame wall, because we're gonna mount that steering box on there. So this is a good time to clean that out. We'll get that done. Let's take a look at the steering box. So this is it. This is what I had. Remember I had cut mine and modified it. And here's the new one. So you can see how much longer. See, I was talking about that section's larger, so that's gonna change what I need to use. I may be able to use this again, but we'll figure it out when we get there. So now, the next thing I wanna do is I wanna align the steering box so that it's centered, so that the pitman arm will be in the center, you know, from going left and right, because I don't wanna fight that once I get it in the car. Now there's a couple of ways you can do this. On my particular shaft here, you notice how there's that line right there coming off of the center right there? I wasn't paying attention to where that was when I got this. If that's the center mark, that's great. But if you were to rotate the steering shaft, you can see how it were to rotate this part. So what I want to do is I want to go all the way to one side, lock it all the way over to one side, and then I guess one thing you can do, if you didn't have this mark, or if this mark wasn't, I'm guessing that's what it's for, but if it isn't on yours, you can go all the way to one side and then count the revolutions to the other side. And I think mine is just like three and like not even a quarter of a turn on another turn. So I can come back like 1.5 plus 1/8 of a turn should get this thing pretty centered here. So let's try that. So that's 1.5, and then like an 1/8 of a turn. And again, on mine, it's pretty close. I'm gonna use that mark. I'm gonna do this a couple times, make sure I got it right, and get this thing centered for the pitman arm. And then we can put this on. We'll put this on once in the car because it's gonna be easier to install this pitman arm once the steering box is in the car. And while I'm gonna put it back in the car, I need to find out what this length is gonna be from here. So this will slide on there, but I don't know where this needs to be. There's a cutout right here for the set screw, which is fantastic. I need to find out where the spline shaft on my steering column is gonna meet up with this, and if I can use this piece or if I need to get a new one. Let's go ahead and get this in the car, and then we'll see how this comes out. All right, I was able to get the steering box in, and just like I took it out, actually what worked for me is I put it in upside down and I pivoted it, rotated around my export brace and tilted down and then dropped it in that way. I did scuff up my valve cover, darn it, and then I scuffed up my master cylinder. Removing this stuff and moving this would have been better. I'm chewing stuff up by trying to install things and I'm not liking that, but it's in there. I got it bolted in place, and now we can see the distance or the gap between the steering column and the steering shaft coming out of the steering box. So if I try to use the one that I had on here, it's the problem I'm going to run into is it's actually not long enough. And now if this is supposed to sit down like that, you can see that cutout here on the spline part is at the top of this coupler. So what I've got here is actually this coupler is going to be just too short. You could make it work, but it's not worth the risk. I don't want to modify a bunch of stuff. So what I need to do is see if I can find me a coupler that's going to be a little bit longer that'll work. It's also going to maybe change the depth of this. I might have to move the steering column in or out. I guess I can move it in. That might be something I could do. Let's take a look at that real quick. So coming into the cab here, if you notice the depth of the steering wheel to the dash pad, that's something that I don't want to get too close. If I move the steering column down, I've got some adjustment. There's a slot right here, and there's a tab on this bracket that keeps this thing clocked. I can slide this in and out to give me the position that I want with the steering column, and then I can also tighten and loosen that piece down there at the bottom, and that can also allow me to do just a little bit of this, but mostly it's just the in and out part. So we could move the steering column in. I just don't want to get too close to that. And then also by doing that, it actually changes distance from the seat in here just a little bit and subtle. While I have a tilt column, I can adjust that kind of stuff a little bit. I just want to be careful that I'm not doing, too much with respect to adjusting this stuff. I want to try to keep this distance as much as I can. And then one last thing I want to point out, it's hard to tell in the camera, but those two shafts are actually not in line with each other. They're actually off by just a little bit. And that's where the universal joint's going to be a little better. The joint that I had in here, that's that solid fixed unit, it's going to bind, on the shafts. And I think I'm going to have to get a universal joint. So let me order one of those. And while I'm waiting for that to come, I can shift my attention over to the front here and get this power steering pump mounted on here and figure out what I'm going to do. I got to move that coil. All right, now once we get the belt off, we can go ahead and go after the water pump pulley and the crank hub pulley. Again, this is where my car is different than a lot of the ones. I don't have a fan, I've got the electric fans. So this is gonna be easy to take this pump off, and then we'll go after this crank pulley real quick. Something I should have done earlier was actually loosen the water pump pulley with the belt on, because it holds the water pump in place, but I'm just gonna have to work around it. All right, so here's just a little quick comparison. Nothing fancy about these. This is actual Ford part. This is an aftermarket part, but I wanted to keep the same diameters and keep the same bolt patterns and everything. So we're just gonna go ahead and throw this guy on, and then we'll throw this guy on. And now we can throw our alternator belt back on because it's going to be behind the power steering pump belt. And then I'll tighten that up when we're all done. All right. Now I got to remove my coil. It's in the way because I got to use these 3 bolt holes on the front of this head here. So I'm going to move the coil somewhere else. I'll have to deal with that later. But let's get this out of the way so I can get this new bracket for the power steering pump installed. Next, I want to get this pulley installed on the pump, but before I do that, in the instructions they talk about making sure that the pump speed doesn't exceed 6,800 RPMs. And that shows you how to do this with a little equation. You take your crank pulley diameter, divide it by the diameter of the water pump pulley. In my case, it's a 6-inch and a 6-inch, so that's a 1. And then it's 1 times your RPM at redline, which for mine is actually 6,800. So my pump speed would be 6,800 RPM, at red line on my car, but I rarely get up to that part, so I'm gonna be okay there. All right, put this on here. And we're just gonna drive it down with this fastener. We don't wanna use any kind of pulley separator or anything like that. We're just going to drive it on with this. We'll just hold this pulley and we'll just drive it on. I'm just going to use a larger washer on here to help distribute this load as we drive this on, then I'll take it off and take that washer back off. I also forgot to mention that I put a dab of anti-seize on the threads before I put this bolt in there. All right, and we got that on there. It's unclear how far this needs to seat in the instructions, so I got it down a lot, most of the way. If I need to go any farther, I can come back and I can drive this in a little bit farther, but this thing is, got that thing, I think we got the bottom of the bolt all the way down there, so we're probably where we need to be because the bolt bottomed out. So now we need to torque this to 46 foot-pounds. Whew. That's a tight one. Okay, now I think we're good with this. Now we can get the bracket going. Now for the bracket, you've got all of these parts. And there is a certain order. You've got two 4-inch bolts and a 4.5-inch bolt. If this thing is gonna be on the front of the block like this, the 4.5-inch bolt goes up here, washer, 4-inch bolt. This little bit smaller washer goes in there, like that. And then you're gonna put these guys on the back. But I have an issue because this bolt is actually too small for the head on my block. See, that shouldn't fit in there. That should thread in there. Now I have AFR heads, I have aftermarket blocks. I don't know if this is a 3/8 bolt. I don't know if stock heads have the smaller thread size in the front, but I need 7/16" bolts, not 3/8" bolts. And that's okay, because I can just run down to the hardware store and get the bolts that I need. So now I got the right bolts. We can get this thing loaded up. And then the longer one goes up in this upper corner. And then this large washer goes with one of these guys, and the smaller washer, it goes in here. Now we can put these spacers on, and it should look something more or less like that. Alrighty, trying to get this on here might be a little bit tricky, but those are the 3 locations. Now I don't know if my kit, they just sent the wrong bolts with my kit or what, but or maybe, again, maybe the stock head uses the smaller bolts, but that's all right. We're able to get it figured out. Now we just want to do a quick mock-up and see if the alignment of the new ribs that I got on these new pulleys line up with the pump. And what you've got here is on the bottom of this bracket, there's that trough, there's a nut that's in back there that we're gonna use, and then there's a threaded hole up here. This hole and this hole would be more or less like this, right? And then we could tilt it like so to tighten the belt. But looking at it, it's gonna be hard to tell on the camera, but this is pretty close and straight in line with this one. They do include a spacer that you can put in between here and the bracket if you needed to move it out. I think it's 5/16 inch or something like that. But we don't need that because this is almost dead on right here. So let's get those fasteners put in here and get this thing mounted up. And then the hardware, again, they give you a washer for each one of these bolts. We'll just slide those through here. Just kind of move the pulley around so you can line up those there like that. Now there's no reason to tighten this down yet because we still want to be able to pivot this thing back and forth. It doesn't tell you in the instructions what belt because it doesn't know what you have and where you're going to space everything and stuff. So that's fine, we can figure that out. Plus I have to get some power steering fluid anyways. So to get the belt length, I had an old V-belt here that I had from my alternator when I was putting that on. And I put it on here just to see how close I was. And you're pretty dang close with the belt that I had, but I knew I needed to do a little bit larger. So I went over to Napa and I grabbed a couple of belts. And what I ended up with was a belt that fits, I think, perfectly. And what it is, it's a 25-7417 belt. That's the part number at Napa. But ultimately, it's a 42¼ inch outside circumference with a 7/16 top width. And this, I think, fits perfectly. because when I get this thing nice and tight, this reservoir is going to be vertical, which is what I want. So I think this is going to be perfect. I'm not going to tighten it yet, but we'll get to that when we get done with this whole project. I also was able to find a place to mount the coil. I just actually put a spacer in here and got just a 1/2 inch longer bolt. So this is now a 5-inch bolt for my setup, and is able to get it so it's not resting on the intake manifold or anything. And because of the wire lengths and everything, I don't have a lot of options. I can't put it over here on the fender wall. I can't put it back here because I didn't want to rewire everything, but I think this is going to work out pretty good. It's still compact. It's still clean. I like it. So now let's change our attention to the universal joint that we need to put in here with the steering shaft and the steering box. Before we go into detail about which universal joint I'm going to use, I wanted to talk real quick about the pitman arm. When you put that on the bottom of the steering box, the kind that comes with this one, you can clock it by 1 tooth at a time. You have to be careful that you don't run into your headers or to your frame. So when you put it on there, go through the motions of spinning the steering box and making sure that it clears both ways, clears the headers and clears the frame. Now, because there's not a lot of distance between the end of the steering shaft and my steering box, I'm limited on what I can do for universal joints. And the options that I have are limited. I can use what I had on the car before, which is this solid piece with the splined end and the double D, but it doesn't allow for any kind of adjustment or flexibility in the position of anything. Or I could use, again, same thing, splined end and the double D, but it's got this universal joint here in the center that allows for just a little bit of movement just in case I needed something depending on how things line up. And the issue that I'm facing right now is the length from the steering shaft to the steering box. This one, I'd have to actually move the steering column in towards the dash about a 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch or so, something like that. And this one, I have to move out about 3/4 of an inch. So I gotta find out which one's gonna be the best fit for where the steering wheel feels, but also I gotta make sure that there's the alignment of the two, the steering shaft and the steering box, isn't gonna bind up on anything. And like I was mentioning, I don't want to change the distance between the dash pad and the steering wheel any more than I have to. Coming out, I think would be easier. It gets the steering wheel closer to the driver, and that might be better for, driving scenarios, but it also limits the space that I have. I don't want to have to move my seat back any farther, that kind of stuff. But if I move it in, I'm worried about, as I turn the wheel, I don't want my hands getting too close to the dash. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try that longer one first and see how it comes out. I need to take that clamp off of there, and then I need to take this off the bottom of the dash here. That's gonna let the steering column come loose. Then I can slide that universal joint on the end, put it back up in place and see how it comes out. Now I'm not gonna have to worry about doing any of the wiring. I'm not redoing the steering column shaft like you would with the regular kit, so I can skip all that stuff. But we do wanna move this out just a little bit so that I can get that universal joint plugged in on the steering box, and then we'll plug it onto the end of the steering shaft. So we got the U-joint on the steering box, and don't forget to tighten the set screws and lock those down. Now we can put the steering shaft in. All right, we can see the U-joint poking through. The face of that U-joint is about flush with the firewall, so it will push the steering column in towards the car, but let's put it in there and see how it comes out. All right, I'm having a hard time getting this thread in there. I should double check and make sure that that's gonna fit on the steering shaft first. Okay, so let's just move this to the side and see if this guy will go on there. Oh, that's awesome. I ordered the wrong size. Oh, there goes another week. While I'm waiting for the U-joint to get delivered, I went ahead and started installing the lines. I wanted to point out, there's little arrows on the back side here. You can't see them from the camera, but there's an arrow here and an arrow back here. And the arrow facing down is the in, and the arrow facing up is the out, or the return. And so the farthest fitting here, the one closest to the firewall, is the return line, and then this is the feed line. Also, I installed the return line first. I found that it was easier to install both of these given the limited space back here. I put in the return line on first, and then the feed line. I haven't hooked them up to the pump yet because I want to make sure that everything works and I get that steering shaft connected before, just in case I have to take it back out. But once everything gets connected, then I'm going to go ahead and finish connecting these lines on here, and then we'll put some fluid in here and get it primed. All right, now that we got the right one, or at least I hope it's the right one. So this is what I had before, and this is the one I needed. And see, this diameter here is 3/4 inch. 36 spline, and this one I bought originally is 11/16 3/4 spline, or 11/16 36 spline. So this is the one that I needed. So let's back this guy out. And this should slide onto the shaft now. Oh yeah, there we go. Much better. Cool, so I'll go ahead and let's get this installed back on the steering box. And then we can go back to where we were by trying to put the steering shaft in there. Oh gosh, that was easy. Oh, a lot easier than I thought it'd be. Cool. All right, let's get it locked down. All right, now this is secured. So before, this bracket was roughly in the middle. Here's the very end of the trough right here and this end, and it was roughly centered. So we moved pretty much all the way to the end of the adjustment, which is great because it still works. This thing is clocked, it won't twist on me. The bracket goes in. Now I just need to finish connecting up down there, and then we'll be good on the inside of the car. All right, now that I got all that buttoned up down there, let's just check and see what the new distance is. And I had about 3 inches before. Now I don't know how accurate this is, but we're roughly about 4 inches. So I lost about an inch, or I got the steering wheel is, you know, is closer to the driver, closer to me by an inch. We'll see if that plays a role in anything, if it's gonna affect anything, but it's the best I can do given that was the shortest universal joint I could get for my setup. And we got everything all tightened up down here. All those set screws are locked in, everything's good. So you can see if I would have had the longer steering shaft, this universal, it wouldn't have worked. I would have pushed my steering column even further into the car. So actually, it's really worked out really good that I bought the wrong tilt steering column a couple years ago. You know, I didn't know I was gonna do this, but it ended up working out for me, so that's good. Now that everything's good back there, let's go ahead and finish hooking up these lines, and then we can get some fluid in here and get this system primed. Now before we put fluid in here, I do want to point out the 2 things that are going to affect the power steering is going to be air in the lines and heat. And we want to keep these lines as low as we can. We want to keep them below the reservoir, but because of how small this is and where it's at and the fixed length of these lines, you can push them down a little bit to try to get them below the reservoir, but then you get them really close to the headers and you're going to get them hot. So I may need to do some sort of external cooler. You'd put that on the return line if we did that, but we'll have to figure that out when we get there. But for now, this is the best I can do. I may look into some sort of heat wrap or something to put on these, and maybe something where I can push it down here and then screw something in to hold them down low just to keep it below the reservoir, but just a heads up on that. Let's get some fluid in here and get it primed. One of the ways that I could prime this is just put the belt on and fire up the car and get it to go. But what I wanted is just check for leaks before I fire everything up. But I can put a socket on here and spin this, but I can't spin it fast enough with the tools that I have to get the air out of there. But if I use something like this with a little piece of rubber hose on the end of the socket, I might be able to just get this going. There you go. You saw those bubbles coming out. I'm gonna do that for a little bit, just get as much air as I can out of here and see if the fluid level drops at all, and then we can hook the belt up. All right, I got the level to drop a little bit. It was almost to the bottom of the threads here, and it's down, I don't know, a ½ inch or something. I was able to get some in the lines. I think from here I can go ahead and hook the belt up and then get this thing mounted in the right spot and fire up the car. And then when we do that, we want to turn the steering wheel all the way to one lock and all the way to the other. We're gonna do like 10 times, and then we'll come back and we'll check the fluid level. And look at the rubber on this little socket thing that I made. That edge of that pulley is pretty sharp. She chewed it up pretty good, but that's all right. All right, that's tight. This is tight. Let's fire it up and suck some fluid through here. All right, let's just check the fluid real quick before we start running the steering wheel back and forth. Okay, we got to put a lot more in there. Alrighty, let's see if that pulled some more fluid down. Oh, that's better. Let's just top it off real quick. Okay, so that was one 16-ounce bottle. We're gonna open up a second bottle. So we know we need at least 16 ounces. Alrighty. Now I think we can fire it up and start turning the wheel back and forth. All right, guys, that is power steering installed. Now, I wanted to take it out, but the weather is just so bad right now. In fact, for the next 10 days, it's gonna be just nasty weather, so I'm not gonna get a chance to drive it right now, but power steering is power steering. I just wanna, get a chance to confirm that everything works right, so I'll have to do that in a later video. So what do I got? What do I wanna say about this? One of the best things about this kit is how clean and compact it is, and it's not a big complex system. I really like how small this pump is. The reservoir, everything's a nice little tight little package that works well with what I'm trying to do in my engine bay. I really like having a less is more kind of an engine bay where, tucking some of the wires and stuff and moving things around to just clean it up. I've been working on this for several years. I'm finally trying to get to where I want to be with this thing, and this power steering system works along with what I'm trying to do, which is perfect. And then also having that built into the power steering box instead of having like that power ram down below that goes on the drag link and stuff. I think this is a better fit for what I want and what I'm trying to do, and it looks clean. Some of the things that I'm not wild about, which is not really a product of this kit so much as this is just something that happens with all power steering. I don't like the lines being up top here, running around the shock tower. I might look into doing something where I have some custom lines that maybe round down below, maybe into the fender. I don't know, I'll have to check that out later, but I wanna reduce the lines as much as I can. And the other thing is, again, having that bump in the line where the air bubbles can get trapped in there, I wanna reduce that as much as I can. And if I had some custom lines, maybe I can get rid of that. So we'll see on something like that down the road. Other than that, this kit came out really well. I had that little snafu with that universal joint, but that's something that's only gonna happen to me because I wasn't paying attention. You guys are gonna be a lot better than I am on that. And then I had that tilt steering column, so that worked out really well with what I have. I'll put all the part numbers down below of the stuff that I have, so that if you were trying to replicate this, you know what you need to get. Again, not trying to beat that dead horse, but that tilt steering column that I should have purchased back when I did it would have been too long for this, and it would have put the steering wheel too far into the cab, and I think this worked out really well. In fact, when I was sitting in the car, starting it up and stuff like that, the steering wheel is an inch closer to me, but because of that, it's on an angle. By being an inch closer, it's actually up just a little bit higher, and my legs can get underneath the steering wheel just a little bit easier. Now I have a tilt column, so I can always adjust that, but I don't want to have to tilt it up every time I get in and out of the car. So it's just a nice little bonus that the way this worked out, it's just a little easier for ingress and egress, right, in my car, and I like that. And where the steering wheel is, it's not, it's not way up close and something like that. It's fine. So when I get a chance to get out and drive it, we'll talk about a little review when I do that later. But anyways, other than that, this kit is great, and everything it works. I mean, I went through and did that whole process where you go back and forth between the lock to lock, and I checked the fluid level a couple of times, and I only did have one issue where back when I first fired this up and I was trying to go lock to lock, there's a ring on the firewall that you grab the bottom of the steering column with, and there's a little clamp and stuff. I actually had to cut out just a little bit on the bottom of that because the set screw for the universal joint was hitting that as it went around. It kept me from turning the wheel all the way. I could force it, but then it would just grind into that little bracket. So I took it off and just ground out a little bit of the trough on it and put it back in there, and now that set screw clears. It's going around. Again, that probably won't be a thing you're gonna have to deal with, but that's something I had to do on my car. So for the power steering fluid, I used about 1.25 bottles or 1.33 bottles. What I've got here, I just put a little black mark here on the bottle where the level is. So however much is supposed to be in that when you get new, plus a whole nother bottle. So you're gonna need to get 2. So just a heads up on that. And then again, you're gonna wanna make sure you get the right pulleys for your setup, because when they sell the kit, they don't know what you have and what engine you have your fans and all that kind of stuff. So make sure you check that out. So where can you get this kit? This is from Mike Maier. Again, you go on his website, you can select the kit that fits your car because there's different years, so make sure you check that out. Buy that, get it installed. I'm in about 2 weeks. I mean, you probably saw how much more this beard has grown. The reason why is I waited to get everything installed before I get that U-joint ordered to make sure I had the right, the length in case that was gonna be an issue, because there are longer U-joints that you can buy. I wanted to make sure I got the right one. I didn't order the right one because the spline size was too small. So that took me another week. So I'm 2 weeks into this, but you can, if you had all the parts, you can easily knock this out in a weekend and you guys be back on the road. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, that's that. On to the next project, and we'll keep this thing going.